Welcome to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where we feature top leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry with your host, Drew Hendricks. Now, let's get started with the show.
Drew Hendricks here. I'm the host of the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where I talk with leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry, from tech companies that enable wineries to run at optimum efficiency, to today's guest, Daniel Daou, whose vision for Paso Robles as a world-class Cabernet region has become a reality. Today's episode, it's sponsored by Barrels Ahead. At Barrels Ahead, we work with you to implement a one-of-a-kind marketing strategy, one that highlights your authenticity, tells your story, and connects you with your ideal customers. In short, we help wineries and craft beverage producers unlock their story to unleash their revenue. Go to barrelsahead.com today to learn more. I am super excited to talk today with Daniel Daou. Daniel's the winemaker and co-proprietor of Daou Family Estates. He's a true visionary. Back in 2007, Daniel saw the immense potential of Paso Robles and the unique terroir that is now known as Daou Mountain, located in the Adelaida district. Daou's wines consistently receive the highest praise from both critics and peers alike. In a region commonly thought of as better suited to Rhone varietals, Daniel's Cabernet Sauvignons, they've shattered this misconception. In 2012, Daniel founded the Cab Collective, a grassroots nonprofit organization of winemakers who believe that Paso Robles can produce Cabernets that rival the best in the world. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for being on. So we're recording this. You just wrapped up another harvest and just came back from a pretty epic European tour from what I saw on social media.
Yes. This harvest was very long, made me work extremely hard. And then, I pretty much circled around all of Europe, hitting so many countries. And it was kind of interesting because everywhere I went, 2 days later, they would either shut it down or no more travel.
Oh, no.
Fortunately, it went great. And I had the chance to meet wonderful people and really talk about the wines and taste the wines. In some cases, I was doing 3 or 4 classes a day. And the reception has been, exhilarating. So extremely pleased with the trip and happy to be back home in Paso.
Oh, I imagine. How was the harvest this year?
The harvest turned out to be amazing. I have to tell you, it was challenging at first. It was an interesting vintage where we fluctuated back and forth between extreme heat and extreme cold, which is kind of bizarre. But I guess that's probably the new thing right now. We don't know what to expect with the weather. I've given up looking at the weather forecast because I never know what's going to be happening or not. So fluctuated back and forth between hot and cold, and eventually by early September, it got so cold and never warmed back up. So when that happens, the wines take a little bit longer to start showing what they're made out in barrel. So that I was a little bit nervous for about a month, but I just actually got to taste the wines yesterday, and I'm blown away by the quality. I think this is going to be one of our best vintages yet, together with 19 and 20, which were other 2 extremely great vintages, as well as 18. We've had a series of 4 outstanding vintages back to back. So very happy about that.
Oh, that's fantastic. So let's go back a little bit to 2000. Well, actually, even before then, where did you get your start of winemaking? It was back down in San Diego.
So initially, obviously, I developed my passion for drinking wine in France, growing up there. Started my schooling in San Diego at UCSD, where I got my degree in computer engineering, and my brother got it in electrical engineering at UCSD as well. We lived in San Diego, started our first company in San Diego that was based in the Sorrento Valley, basically providing computer networks to the healthcare industry. And then I spent 8 years searching the globe for what I felt would be the perfect terroir, the perfect place for growing these Bordeaux varieties. And while doing that, I cut my teeth on a acre vineyard in Rancho Santa Fe, a blend of Cabernet and Merlot mostly. And it was fun. It was enjoyable. I actually would make the wine, Drew, and I would have people come visit us. I'd take them back to the garage where my small winery was, and they would taste the wine. I would always hear the same thing. Wow, this is actually pretty good. I never expected that. It was a fun project. Definitely allowed me to, get initiated to the world of winemaking.
It was the minimum viable model to prove that you could do it, and your future was
exactly. It was good because it started out small, and then that's kind of how I started most of my companies. The first company we had, my brother and I, we always worked together. I say me, but it's really we together. The first company we had, I built a network in my living room,
Oh,
a
geez.
small one. And I felt, okay, I can do this. So let's go out and get it sold. And that's what we did. But we did the same with the wine, pretty much.
That's awesome. So what drew you to Paso Robles of all the regions? And
So it's important to understand that, because once you understand the uniqueness of this French word that we use called terroir, which I'm sure you've heard about, and you'll understand why today we view ourselves not as a winery, but as a case of disruptive innovation. And I'm going to give you the science and the explanation as to why this is not just another winery. Let me start from the top and actually drill down to the bottom. If anybody had told you or myself or anybody else 10 years ago that a Cabernet from Paso Robles, a high-end cab from Paso, would outsell every Napa or California cab that's high-end in California besides one winery 2 years in a row, people would have laughed really hard. They would have choked. But that is exactly what happened the last 2 years. Our Daou label, which is that's gonna lead us into patrimony in a second. Our Daou label, our Soul of a Lion, has been one of the best sold Cabernet Sauvignon high-end in California 2 years in a row. It's also one of the highest rated in the region. Our Cabernet Sauvignon that we make under the Daou label, which sells for about $20, $25, is the number one sold Cabernet Sauvignon in the luxury category in the United States today. So the question is, first of all, I'm not saying that to boast by any means. I'm saying that to indicate the fact that there's something going on that's causing consumers to buy these wines, which are not traditionally from known regions like Sonoma or Napa or Washington, for that matter, or any other places. Question is, why is that happening? And this is the explanation I'm going to give to you. That is a scientific answer to this question that I posed. Let's talk about terroir, Drew. Terroir really explains the place that you're at. You could probably have 10 different opinions of what terroir is, but I think the consensus is that the two predominant things that people talk about when they talk about terroir are soil and climate. Soil and climate is going to really determine the quality of your wine. So what is so unique on our mountain in Paso that doesn't exist anywhere else on the planet, that is allowing us to make wines that are really revolutionizing the way people look at Cabernet Sauvignon and other Bordeaux varieties? Well, let's start with soil. What do we know about soil? See, the wine industry is very old. It's thousands of years old. So you've got data that goes back thousands of years ago, not just 20 years or 50 years. Well, history tells us that when it comes to soils, the most sought after soils in the world for growing vines are soils that in French we call argilo-calcaire, or in English, calcareous clay. Now, these are very unique soils. Going back to the Romans, they sought out these soils to actually plant vines because they realized that these soils gave you the best chance of making not only the best wine, but wines that retain freshness, elegance, balance, and also survive with no outside irrigation. These soils allow you to do that. They provide much more than fruit and alcohol. They provide minerality. They provide earthiness. They allow you to really taste the expression of the soil where the vines are growing. And they allow you to dry farm, even in places like California where you don't see water for 9-10 months out of the year, sometime like this year. Those vines can still thrive and survive without any outside irrigation. No other soil allows you to do that. Now, in France, it rains, let's face it, the whole summer. I mean, I go back 3 times a year and I'm always dodging the rain with an umbrella in the summer. So dry farming is not a big, huge proposition. I mean, it rains, you're good for a month, and then it rains again, and you're fine. But in California, we don't see rain. So that plays even a bigger role to have these soils. These soils go beyond fruit and alcohol. Again, they give you minerality, but also they allow you to make naturally made wines that are not acidulated with tartaric acid at a harvest time, wines that don't have to have all these things added to them because they really give you a pure expression of what grows there. There's only one problem with these soils, and maybe you figured it out by now. They don't exist in California. Most of California is on 4 types of soil: clay, loam, sandy, and volcanic, or a combination of those 4. But you never find these soils. They're not known to be in California. They're known for being French. You find them in Bordeaux, in Burgundy, in the Loire Valley, in Champagne, in Alsace, in the Loire Valley. I mean, the list goes on, in Tuscany, and many other places. So the first thing we wanted to find is European soils, because we understood that they were superior soils. Well, guess what? The biggest presence of these soils in California, one of the only ones, there's only a few, is actually on the west side of Paso Robles, where you find these same exact soils you'll find in places like Bordeaux or Burgundy or any other place in France for that matter. So that's the unique thing that we found. Soils that are reminiscent of Europe, that go beyond fruit and alcohol, that give you freshness and elegance. They are not just heavy and high alcohol and fruit forward, but rather they're fresh, they're elegant, they're restrained, but then they're powerful as well. Okay. Well, let's talk about climate. That's the second parameter. Climate is very badly misunderstood in Paso. I have yet to, go through a week or so without hearing some journalist or social media post that says, well, I've been to Paso and it is very hot. So let's talk about that. Paso is 614,000 acres. It is larger than Napa and Sonoma put together. It is twice the size of Bordeaux. Now, if you've been to Bordeaux, you can drive for 2 hours to go from one end to another. I mean, it's huge. Mm-hmm. Twice the size of Bordeaux, twice. So, unfortunately, people come too often to town. They stay downtown where it could be very hot. They come in July or August where it is hot downtown, and they leave and they write an article saying, I've been to Paso, but it is very hot. Let's compare that.
They also probably took the I-5 in from the Central Valley.
Exactly. Went through the Lost Hills and they saw 120 degrees and they thought, it's hot in Paso. That would be like me going to Carneros, which I'm sure you've been to, where it's very cold, where they do sparkling wine mostly, and leaving there and writing an article and posting it on social media saying, well, I've been to Napa and Sonoma. It is very cold. I wonder how to grow that, which makes no sense. So instead, let's look at numbers, because numbers don't lie. Mm-hmm. There are two ways to measure climate. The first one is how many days reach 100 degrees Fahrenheit per year. And why is that? Because at 100 degrees or close to that, the vine shuts down and no longer produces sugar. You get canopy burn, you get sunburn on the grapes, which depletes color, creates cooked flavors. So you really don't want to have too many days at 100 degrees, because in effect, you're delaying your harvest and you're creating flavors that are not ideal. Okay. The second way to look at climate is you look at the average maximum temperature on a daily basis, and you average that out. Now, why is that? Because based on that, you will know kind of where your growing degree days are, how much heat you've got received, and basically, are you on the top of the bell curve where you want to be? Are you in the low part of the bell curve where you're going to have pyrazine and bell pepper and graininess because you don't ripen? Or are you past the top where you're going to get these cooked flavors with high alcohols, very heavy wines that are not fresh, right? So you want to be in the middle. Well, let's take, for instance, the last 2 years. 2019, a cooler year in California. Number of days that reached 100 degrees or more in Paso Robles downtown by the airport was 28. Okay, so that means for 28 days, most likely that vine did not produce sugar, went into survival mode, and didn't do anything. Okay, therefore causing a delay of a month for harvesting, which is never good. Yeah. Napa, St. Helena, saw 11 days at 100 degrees that year. Okay, our mountain, which by the way is the only site in the entire state of California where there's a vineyard at 2,200 feet, but only 14 miles from the very cold Pacific Ocean, 14 miles as the crow flies.
Yeah.
Saw 0 days at 100 degrees, not a single day. Our average maximum temperature is always 5 to 7 degrees cooler than Paso, 3 to 5 degrees cooler than St. Helena and Napa. Okay, so it's a very unique climate. It's a climate that allows you to achieve ripeness year after year without cooking the grapes, without having that pyrazine in the palate either, which is horrible to taste, especially if it's overdone, right? So 2020, same situation. We had, it was a very warm year. We saw 6 days at 100 degrees. Napa saw 13, Paso saw 32. And again, we ran about 3 to 5 degrees cooler than Napa and 5 to 7 cooler than Paso. So when you take a look at this combination of soil and climate that I just described, the only place we found that could be similar, but not quite, but almost there, is Tuscany. Okay, but otherwise, it's very hard to find these two conditions into one location. Definitely not in California. You will not find it. So when we found that, we packed our bags, moved up to the mountain, erected a modular, and I actually planted the first 26 acres myself, not alone, of course, with some help, but I was out there planting because we believe that we had discovered something that's extremely unique. So what does it mean in the wine, most importantly? Then we're gonna, if you like, delve into patrimony, because that really defines the peak of what we found. What we're able to do is make a wine that is not acidulated, that is the purest expression of terroir, from our estate, of course, that doesn't get adulterated with color and sugar and all these things that people add to manufacture these wines. These wines are made naturally. They're made with our native yeast, and that's it. So you're really tasting the purest expression of terroir in the glass. Furthermore, when you taste these wines, you will notice that there's nothing that bites you right here or scratch you right here. Why? Because the acid is natural, so it is integrated. When you add tartaric acid, it always bites you in the back of the jaw because it's not integrated. You see, you have to look at wine not as a 7-Up or Coca-Cola. It's a living organism. It's kind of like us. It's like a human being. So what happens if you offset, in your case, let's just say you offset your balance. You get too hot or you get too cold or you eat too much sugar. What happens? You get a headache, right? Because your body goes out of balance. So you get a headache. A headache is a warning sign saying, okay, you're out of balance. Well, the wine does the same thing. You shoot it up with a lot of things. It's going to bite you. It's going to scratch you. It's not going to be happy. And some people say, well, it's already there. So why not add it? Well, because it's like you're offsetting the natural balance of the wine and you taste it in the glass. Okay. The second thing we discovered, and that's going to lead me into patrimony, is there's an objective way and a subjective way at looking at wine quality. The subjective way, and we're not against it, a critic rates the wine, and here's 100. Great. But another critic could taste the same wine and say, that's a 94. It's so subjective. It's based on the palate of the person. It's based on the relationship the critic may have with the wine.
The mood they were in.
Yeah, it's based on the way they woke up that day. Maybe they had a bad day. Maybe they got an argument with their spouse. Who knows, right? You could have a bad day. We don't like to rely on that. We like to take a more objective approach at measuring wine quality. And the way you do that, and this is not new, it goes back decades, is looking at something called phenolics. Why? See, today, you can go way beyond the way you used to go. It used to be that you looked at a glass saying, oh, I like the color. It's very nice. Oh, I think the wine's got good structure. Today, I can look at a wine and say, this wine has 300 parts per million of color molecules. It's really up in the 0.001 percentile of phenolics in the world. Now, why is color important? Because color means texture. Texture means density. There's a very good correlation between these three. And a wine that's more textural is going to be a superior wine and a more enjoyable wine. So I can look at this wine and go beyond that. I can look at this wine saying this wine has 1,500 parts per million of tannins, and tannins are antioxidants. So you know what? This wine is going to be able to age 50 years or more because it's got 1,400 parts of tannins. I can look at this wine also and say, oh, the winemaker really messed up. He both over-extracted the wine. Look at the ratio between them. So the science is really it's come a long way. And many people often, I laugh at them, many people often ask me when I do these interviews, say, well, why isn't anybody talking about phenolics? I laugh, you know what I say? I say, would you talk about your hair if you had none? I mean, the reality of it is I've measured 700 wines from all over the world. We have a bottle of wine that costs $50, actually $43 in the market, that sells all over the country, called the Reserve Cabernet. It has more phenolics than 99% of all the high-end cabs that sell for more than $100 that I've actually measured. So the consumer is able to get, for a fraction of a price, a wine that actually ages, drinks better, more naturally than a wine that costs sometimes 10 times more. So our terroir, because of its uniqueness, allows us to make naturally made wines that are a pure expression of the terroir, that have some of the highest, if not the highest, phenolics on the planet for Bordeaux varieties. That has caused disruption. Because if you are a wine collector and you like to drink wine, and this is, by the way, a story that's like Groundhog Day. We've encountered it thousands of times. You're a collector, and you may be somebody who's very wealthy, who's a billionaire. But you know what? Billionaires can be frugal too. And if you buy this bottle of wine and it knocks your socks off, and then you compare it to all these wines you're spending 10, 20 times the price, and you go, it's not as good. What are you going to do? You're going to buy that wine. It's cheaper and it's better. And it will age as longer, if not longer. And that's why we've caused serious disruption in the wine industry. So going back to patrimony, we realized early on that we had a unique side that would allow us to generate phenolics like the world hasn't seen over and over and over again. And that's important because it's one thing to hit the bullseye one year and have high phenolics, but we're able to do it and replicate it year after year after year. So
how'd you do that? Is it
because of our terroir, it's very consistent. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. It allows us to reach phenolic maturity in the perfect way, therefore allowing us to achieve phenolic levels like the world hasn't seen in most cases, and at the price point, which is even more important. Which is why our Soul of a Lion has outsold all the other cabs in California that have had 40, 50, 80 years of history. We're a newcomer. I mean, we've been out with the Soul of a Lion for 8 years, and it's outselling on and off premise every high-end cab besides one winery in California. What does that tell you? I mean, it's numbers. They don't lie. It's Nielsen ratings. Okay. So now let's go to patrimony. In 2013, I found few rows on our vineyard. Rows. They were just like, I don't know, 8 rows. And the fruit just looked perfect. The exposure looked perfect. The rootstock was perfect. The clone, I mean, everything looked so good. And the grapes tasted so good when I tasted them. I decided, why don't I just make these 8 rows on their own and see what it's like? I'm just curious because it's just perfect, situation with these grapes. So we made the wine, 225 cases, not much, very small quantity. We saw phenolics that we had never seen. I mean, this was totally off the chart. It's like a paradigm shift. Something. We looked at it and we're like, what the heck is that? I mean, that is really, really uber high.
As a comparison, how's that? How are they elevated from the Soul of a Lion?
Anywhere from 20 to 100% higher almost.
Wow.
Yeah. Some vintages 100% higher. So, which is amazing. Because Soul is already one of the highest phenolic Cabernet in the world. So we took this wine and said, it's one thing to make this wine, but we want to treat it the right way. With this high phenolics, we're able to maybe have longer élevage, longer aging in barrel. So we acquired the rarest barrels on earth. In one case, there are only about 20 barrels made per year from fallen trees that are 300 years old in France, and they have extra tight grain. So we require grains to have less than 1 millimeter between the grains. So very slow integration. So we don't want you to drink wood. And if you drink the Patrimony Cab, you'll see that you don't really taste that oak, splurge that goes up in your mouth. We want you to taste the terroir. We want the wood to accentuate it, but not dominate it. So we took these 2 barrels and we aged the wine, not for 22 months, but for 30 months. Now, why is that? Because you see, these wines are extremely well structured, and we wanted the tannins to be very integrated. So when you age a wine in a barrel, the molecules with time get longer. They're called long chain tannins. There's a difference between long chain tannins and short chain tannins. Long chain tannins tend to be more supple, more integrated, more velvety, more silky, more sexy. So we aged this wine for 30 months and then bottled it. And we thought, we have no idea people are going to, we know people are going crazy over the $150, price tag for Soul, but can we really, compete with the Harlands of the world and all the others at a fraction of the price still for $275 a bottle? We said, we had no idea. So we said, if nobody buys it, we'll drink it. It's a hell of a wine. So the wine was sold out in 5 weeks, and there was a 3-year waiting list. So we continued making the same quantity, about 225 cases or so, or 250 every year. And finally, last year, we were able to, we were approached by a wonderful team. Most of the team that built Opus One, especially on the West Coast, who have been there for 21 years, and one gentleman who actually was running the sales for Opus One and the marketing, and a few others as well. So they all decided to leave Opus One. They approached us, and they joined Patrimony. And so we've taken some of that wine and allocated it to the wholesale market so we can actually get it out in the industry, because we wanted people to, everybody to discover, not just a few that are lucky and got a waiting list. And it's been a tremendous success. The wine is totally sold out. We have, I think our team is just having fun right now celebrating the holidays because there's nothing else to actually allocate. And we have decided to build a beautiful winery. We've acquired a property adjacent to our mountain, so it's part of our mountain, which will be dedicated to Patrimony with hopefully a chateau-like That would look like a chateau from France, but not gaudy or anything. Very humble and very more like a right bank than a left bank chateau. If you've been to Bordeaux, the left bank chateaus tend to be very gaudy and very but the right bank tend to be more country-like, and that's really the look we're going after. And we're having fun. We're having a great time. We hope to have the winery, ready to go by 2024. We love what we do. We created patrimony to be a legacy for my brother and I. That's why on the bottle it says Legatum Nostrum in Latin, which means our legacy. So we hope that by putting our best wines in this label, patrimony, that hopefully even a long time after we're gone, people will remember that these two guys came in and created something very unique for Paso and for California in general, because we don't see ourselves competing with Napa. We actually see ourselves as helping California rise to a whole new level, and which is why we focused quite a bit internationally. We're in 50 countries today, and I can tell you, after visiting about 7 of them, I got asked over and over again, "Can we have more patrimony?" We're like, we don't have that much. You're gonna have to wait. I mean, it's a small production still. And it will probably always stay very small. I mean, it's never going to be something that's huge. But it's more about showing the potential that the region can hold and can attain. And that's really what we focus on.
Sure. Oh, that's amazing. And then, so is the patrimony, are you building it right on Daou Mountain or adjacent to it? It's on a new, what property was it?
It's right adjacent. So we bought 270 acres that's connected to Daou Mountain. And they're basically connected, so they're like next door to each other.
Oh, that's great.
That's where the patrimony wine is being built there.
Oh, that's fantastic. Going back to when I love all this stuff with patrimony, and man, it's definitely worth the price. I did try it about 6-7 months ago. I was lucky enough to open one of his bottles, and you're right about the velvety tannins. What a treat! But going back to when you first planted Daou's vines, there must have been a tremendous pressure to plant Rhone varietals. I mean, driving up Adelaide Road, it's Rhone land.
Well, Adelaide has always been known as Bordeaux.
Oh, really? I stand corrected there.
Yeah, but there are some parts in Paso that are known for Rhone, and they still are. But let me give you some statistics. There's 45,000 acres or so planted in Paso. You want to guess how many of them are Bordeaux?
I will probably get it wrong. 10,000.
No, percentage-wise.
Oh, percentage of that, I would say 15%.
60% is Bordeaux.
Holy moly! I could not be more wrong.
You want to guess how much is Rhone?
I'm going to go with 16%.
Oh, you're close. 13. So you see, it's a misconception that the region is known for Rhone. I know that critics, especially, have been trying to shove that into consumers' mind that this is a Rhone region because Napa is a Cab region. But in reality, Paso's too large for that. You can't lump sum 614,000 acres into one variety. It makes no sense. There are some places that grow great Rhone varieties, like the Templeton Gap, the Willow Creek. I love Rhone varieties from there. Actually, they taste very good. Adelaide, though, I'm sorry, I do differ probably with some people's opinion, but I don't think so. And I'll tell you why. If you go down to these elevations, lower elevations, and people get very excited, they see these soils with rock croppings everywhere, and they go, "Oh my gosh, this is great soil." Yes, they're great for Rhone. They're horrible for Bordeaux. And I'll tell you why. Bordeaux varieties like shade. They don't want to be beaten up by the sun all day because they don't handle the sun that well. So you want to be able to form a full canopy that's like 4.5, 5 feet tall in order to protect yourself so that the grapes are protected. Well, when you have these rocky soils and you don't have the clay component, you just have the limestone soils, you don't get a canopy. The canopy goes about 1 foot high. So growing Cabernet Bordeaux is a horrible idea because you're going to get sunburn left and right. The Rhone varieties do handle it very well, though. I mean, places like Jumilla in Spain, right? You beat it up on the heat all day long with very hot temperature, they thrive. The Rhone Valley the same way. So many different regions that have a lot of heat, the Rhone varieties grow very well. But when it comes to Bordeaux, clay plays a huge role. You need that clay. So why is it that the Adelaide is so good for Bordeaux varieties? There are 2 main reasons for that. The first one, because of the elevation, you're in the Santa Lucia range, right? You get fewer days at 100 degrees. And Cab doesn't like getting much higher than 100. I mean, it's already high in 100. Less than that is better. Low 90s, it's perfect. High 80s, it's perfect. So you don't want to be in that scenario where you have, 110-degree weather for, 4 weeks. It's just not going to do well. But that's one reason. The second reason is to form the canopy, right? You need that canopy. You need to make sure that the canopy can be formed. Well, what helps with that is the clay, right? So when there was a tectonic movements millions of years ago, and the Templeton Gap got separated, all that topsoil got pushed up to the higher elevation. Oh. So when you go to our vineyard, you will see basically clay, and you'll think, oh, they just have clay. Well, try to dig about 1.5 to 3 feet deep. It's pure limestone, but it's underneath that clay. And the clay is important to provide color, to provide texture, to provide vigor for the canopy to be built up very well. So there are some places that grow great rhodes in Paso, and nobody's denying that. But when critics or other people say it's a rhode region, they are way off. That would be like me going to Sonoma, Drew, and saying it's a Pinot region. How do you think Alexander Valley would feel? Or Dry Creek, which grows great Zinfandel and Petit Syrah. They wouldn't feel very good about that. They go, well, we're in Sonoma, but we're good for Cab. We're Alexander Valley. Oh, we're in Dry Creek. We do great Zinfandel and Petit Syrah. The Russian River, yeah, they do great Pinot and Chardonnay. So you cannot lump sum everything. You cannot lump sum a region as big as Paso into one variety. That's silly.
Yeah, it is a huge region. Do you think Paso should be split up into sub-AVAs rather than districts?
I don't know.
There is a dichotomy between the east side and the west side.
That used to be the case a long time ago. No longer true today.
Okay.
2014, I believe it was, where they split the appellation into 11 sub-appellations. So, for instance, today when you see Adelaide District, people think of Bordeaux varieties. When they see Willow Creek, most likely they think of Rhone varieties. They see Templeton Gap, they're probably going to see possibly some Chardonnay because it gets very cold down there, with the fog coming in and covering the vineyards all the way till noon during the summer. You don't get as much sun. I have some beautiful vineyards that grow Viognier, that grow Grenache Blanc, Roussanne, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir. That does very well down in the Templeton Gap. I've seen some very good results. Then you start going east, El Pomar. Depends where you are in El Pomar. Some places do great Cab. Other places do great Petit Syrah and Syrah. The more east you go, I think the more you're going to do better with probably, Syrah and Petit Syrah. And the more west you go in El Pomar, you're going to probably be better off with Cab. I mean, where Almond Creek is, which is about pretty close to the freeway, not too far in. Great Cabernet grew there. Excellent Cabernet. So it's hard to lump sum a big region like Paso, but there's room for everybody. We don't need to fight over if it's Cab or Pinot or whatever. I think there's room for everybody to grow what they like, and hopefully they're in the right location.
That has been so helpful. I mean, there's so many misconceptions that I even myself have. I've been to Paso many, many times, and still have those kind of misconceptions that you just think east side, west side, and you don't really realize how solidified Paso's become with its terroirs and the different regions and what vines are suited there. But there's one other aspect to your wines that I do want to talk about is your work with native yeasts and how that role in what makes Daou's wine so special.
They do. So I'll give you a background on that. 30, 40 years ago, almost everybody in the world made wine with a strain of yeast called Saccharomyces cerevisiae. And Saccharomyces cerevisiae basically is the kind of yeast that is very sexy. It imparts floral components. It really does a good job with tannins. So it really imparts things that really make the wine superior. The problem is most of these yeasts traditionally do not handle very high alcohol. They'll go to 13 and a half. You start going to 15, they're going to get stuck and they won't be able to digest the sugar. So because of global warming, today this will shock you, but in a good vintage in Bordeaux, you're at 15% alcohol. So it's not just California, it's Bordeaux as well. But in Bordeaux, obviously in a bad vintage, you're going to be at 13 or 13 and a half. But in a great vintage, you're going to be at 15. I've measured many of those wines with high pHs as well. So when that started happening, winemakers started getting stuck fermentations. So most of the wine world today started going towards what's called a Bioness strain yeast, which is a yeast that is just a fermenter. It's a very strong fermenter. It can handle up to 17.5% alcohol, but it smells like cardboard. I mean, there's nothing sexy to it. So in 2012, I've collected some grapes from our vineyard, sent it to Italy, worked with a lab, We identified 100 different isolates, basically different strains of yeast that were living natively on our grapes, and took the pain of measuring and testing every one of them. And we hit the jackpot with number 20. The company that helped us with that said that in 35 years, they had never seen anything like that. It's a Saccharomyces cerevisiae, but that acts like a bionist. It can handle up to 17+% alcohol. It can handle up to 104 degrees in fermentation temperature, which is very rare because most of them die around 98, maybe, or 95, sometimes less. It stabilizes color amazingly well. It stabilizes the tannins even better. So we hit the jackpot, and we started using it to ferment all our wines. When you smell it, it smells like strawberry, cream, and truffle. A very, very sexy yeast. And then we know a company came to us and says, please let us sell it to the rest of the world. We said, okay. So today you'll find that yeast in 35 countries, from Moldova all the way to South Africa. And I was actually in Bordeaux a few weeks ago, and they're using it as well there. So it's exciting. It's a great yeast. We didn't mind sharing it with the world. And again, it outperforms every other yeast that we've tested so far.
That's amazing. Well, that's a clear state of disruption there. I mean, something as far as yeast, because I do remember when those new strains of yeast came out back in the late 90s, where suddenly all the wines kind of jumped from 14% to 17%. It seemed like within 2 years.
I know. Great.
And so talk to me about where you see the region going. So you're building patrimony, and you were committed to the Paso region. Where do you see Paso Robles in 10, 15 years from now?
I think 10 to 15 years from now, I think the winemakers and vintners in Paso and the consumers will zoom in on the right places in Paso to grow the varieties they love. So today there is no argument over when you go to Sonoma, right? If you go to Alexander Valley, well, I think you're going to expect to have some Bordeaux wines, Cabernet, and others. If you go to Russian River, you're going to be tasting Pinot and Chardonnay. Paso's not there. Paso's 20 years away from that. Today, you still have people that get very upset if you dare mention that this is a Cab region and they happen to have a Rhone vineyard. They just go crazy over you, and they're like, no, you're wrong. But I think the consumer is going to decide. And my brother and I are very consumer driven. We trust the consumer. The consumer is smart. The consumer will eventually decide. The same way they've decided Soul of a Lion is a better wine at $150 than most other wines, then they will decide where to go in Paso to actually taste the kind of wines they like. And that will shape the region. So it doesn't matter, what vintners have planted, the consumer is going to decide at the end of the day.
No, that's very true. And that's great advice for anybody in the wine industry. Listen to the consumer. Too often we're trying to impress what we want onto them rather than listening. Exactly. What other advice would you give a young winemaker just starting out in the region?
I would say focus on making what you love, what you're passionate about. Don't pay attention to trends. Don't pay attention to, following the sheep protocol. Just because somebody's here doing this, then I'm going to do this. Do what you love. Because I tell you, if you love what you do, if you love the variety that you work with, you'll make great wine. You'll be passionate about it. If you're just doing it as a job or because you have to fit a certain trend, it's not going to be successful. So if you're a young winemaker, follow your dreams, follow your passion. Don't pay attention to the naysayers. The same as I did. I followed my dream. I didn't pay attention to people telling me, and they still tell me, oh, you know what, this is a rural region. No, it's not. It depends where you are. But I would say I would give the best advice to young winemakers to do that.
Well, that's great advice. We all should be following our passions. As you followed your passions at the beginning, is there anything you would have done over again in founding the Daou?
No. Surprisingly enough, my brother and I were talking about that just a few days ago, for that matter. We're like, you know what? It's hard to look back and say we should have done this differently. We really have a hard time doing that. And so far, we made the right bets. We followed our hearts. We've done our due diligence. We've done our homework. We've used our engineering background to really, make calculated decisions in terms of how to grow things and how to go about them. We've crafted some incredible relationships in the industry with distributors, with patrons, with restaurant owners, with retail owners. And we're very thankful for that. It's a wonderful industry. And I tell you, we've made so many friends in the last 10 years in this industry that it attracts people that are like-minded. It attracts people that love life, that love to be around good company, good food, good wine. It's hard to go wrong. I mean, it's just a wonderful industry.
It absolutely is. I spent the last 30 years in it in different capacities. I couldn't agree more with that. And I do see their engineering background, just in the whole way that how quickly Daou came onto the scene, how quickly you made the decisions the way an engineer would make it, and the processes were in place.
Yes. So we're very strong on processes. Everything is buttoned down to make sure that it's done with preciseness. We're very precise in what we do, and that's something that I think our engineering background has really helped us with.
And that's what people often confuse engineers with not being artistic, but it's having those processes and systems in place that allows the artistry to come out. Because if everything's all awry, it's very hard to be artistic, other than being that random mad artist.
So people often ask me, does that mean that you go by numbers? I said, no. I say the numbers explain to me what I did. So I don't get lucky once every 20 years. I'm able to replicate it. But at the end of the day, the numbers only help us measure what we've done. Everything is done from the heart. Everything is done, as a gift. Like I've been asked before, not to be boastful in any way, but one of the last tastings that I've done with the St. Robert Parker Wine Advocate, out of 30 wines that I submitted, 21, I believe, got 95 points or higher. And people ask me, how'd you do that? And the answer was, I don't know. And they looked at me like, what do you mean you don't know? I said, I don't know. I make hundreds of decisions every day when I make the wine. It's not a formula. It's just, I trust my palate. I trust my gut. It's a gift. Technology definitely is helpful, though, because it gives me like an early warning system and allows me to measure what I've done. But at the end of the day, it's not something that I can have a recipe for. There is no recipe in winemaking. And if there is, you're not going to make good wines.
That's great. That's great advice. So as we're kind of wrapping down, I do want to, Paso Robles, Bordeaux varietals aside, what other wine regions are you most excited about right now in the world?
Tuscany. Very excited about Tuscany. I think down the road, we'll probably work on a project there. I find similar conditions than what we found on a mountain, with beautiful soil, beautiful climate. And I've tasted some incredible wines that I believe can definitely, approach the quality that we're producing here today. So don't be surprised in the near future, we have a Tuscan project producing wine.
Oh, I can't wait to see that. Man, okay, I'm going to keep my eye out. Man, well, so Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people learn more about you and Daou Wines?
They can follow me on Instagram at daniel.j.daou, Daou, or they can obviously follow Patrimony Estates, which I hope they do. They can also follow Daou Vineyards Instagram. But I think that's the best way to keep up with what we're doing. I post a lot of things personally on my Insta. I do a lot of education. During harvest, I take people inside the winery with me, show them how I make the wine, how I do my pump overs. So if you're in the mood of being entertained and also getting some education, follow me, follow Patrimony Estate, which does the same, as well as Daou Vineyards Instagram.
Sounds fantastic. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure. I hope to meet with you, meet you in person, hopefully in the near future.
Oh, absolutely. We're up in Paso all the time. Well,
that sounds great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.